Pay close attention because what you're about to hear challenges everything you've been told about relationships. When a woman stops reaching out, goes quiet, and disappears from a man's notifications, it doesn't reduce her importance in his mind. It actually increases it. While most advice pushes constant effort, availability, and always staying in contact, the truth works in the opposite direction. Distance, when it happens naturally, can intensify attention instead of weakening it. When you pull back from communication, you don't simply fade from his thoughts, you settle deeper into them. If you stay until the end, you'll understand the psychological mechanisms behind this shift and how some women unknowingly create stronger attraction simply through absence. Before we go further, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Absence creates a psychological response that constant presence can never produce. Many people assume that being consistently available keeps them important, but over time it removes mystery and impact. When everything about you becomes predictable, instant replies always being accessible, and your attention guaranteed, you stop standing out emotionally. The mind doesn't obsess over what feels secure, it focuses on what feels incomplete or slightly out of reach. When communication suddenly stops, it breaks that familiar pattern. He no longer has full access, and that interruption creates curiosity, mental replay, and emotional tension. This is where the shift happens. For most of the interaction, he has been operating from control. He reaches out, you respond. But once that pattern breaks, his attention recalibrates, and your absence becomes something he can't ignore. This pattern gives him a sense of certainty. He feels like he already understands the situation. He knows you're interested, he knows you respond, and he assumes your attention will always be there whenever he wants it. But the moment you pull back, that sense of control breaks. He's no longer sure where you stand or what's going on in your life. That uncertainty creates a mental gap, and his mind immediately tries to fill it with questions and assumptions. From a deeper psychological angle, human behavior is driven by pursuit of what feels unclear or slightly out of reach. When something becomes steady and predictable, interest slowly fades. But when it becomes uncertain again, attention intensifies. So when you step back, you shift from something familiar into something unknown, and that shift triggers his instinct to re-engage and figure things out. In real life, this shows up in very simple behaviors. He starts checking his phone more often than usual. He notices the silence where your messages used to be. He replays past conversations in his head, trying to find the moment things might have changed. Even small details suddenly feel important because his mind is searching for answers that aren't there. The longer the silence continues, the more his thoughts circle back to you without effort. This is also the moment where he starts questioning the dynamic itself. He wonders if he did something wrong, if your feelings shifted, or if someone else has entered your life. These unanswered thoughts keep looping, and that loop is what strengthens emotional fixation over time, turning simple absence into something he can't easily ignore anymore. It begins with simple curiosity, then slowly turns into mental preoccupation, and eventually grows into something deeper that feels like fixation. The real shift happens when the usual dynamic changes. In the beginning, he often feels like he has the upper hand. He sets the rhythm of communication, decides when to reach out, when to respond, and when to move things forward. But the moment you stop initiating, that balance changes completely. He is no longer the one leading the pace. Now he is the one waiting, wondering, and trying to interpret silence. That reversal of roles creates discomfort, because many men are not used to being uncertain about someone they are genuinely interested in, and that uncertainty makes them pay closer attention, not less. As the silence continues, his mind begins to work harder on its own. Without constant interaction to define you, he starts filling in the blanks himself. He remembers the best conversations more than anything else. He recalls the moments that felt good, the laughter, the connection, and the emotional highs, while the ordinary or less exciting parts start to fade. Over time, his memory becomes selective, almost idealized, because distance gives the mind room to reshape perception. You stop being just someone he talks to casually and start becoming someone who feels significant, someone whose absence now carries weight. That feeling of loss or potential loss increases your value in his internal narrative, making you harder to forget and harder to replace. This is why, in many cases, men re-engage more strongly after silence than during constant communication. It is not that you disappear from their mind, it is that you become more present in a different way. When a man is truly interested, silence doesn't create indifference, it creates discomfort. And that discomfort pushes him to seek resolution by reaching out. Men tend to disengage from situations that feel overly easy or one-sided, not from situations where genuine interest exists but attention has become unpredictable. When you step back, you reintroduce mystery, and mystery naturally reactivates curiosity, and curiosity is often the starting point of desire being renewed again. It is important to see this not as manipulation but as balance. Many women end up over-investing in the early stages of connection. They initiate most conversations, maintain emotional momentum, and try to keep things alive through constant effort. Over time, that creates an imbalance where one person is doing all the emotional work while the other becomes passive. Stepping back breaks that pattern. It signals that your time, attention, and emotional energy are not unlimited or automatic. They must be met with equal effort. That shift is not about punishing someone, it is about recognizing your own worth and no longer carrying the entire weight of the connection alone. And that kind of self-respect often changes how you are seen far more than constant availability ever could. The psychological principle behind this is known as intermittent reinforcement. When something is consistently available, its emotional reward tends to decrease over time. But when access becomes unpredictable, when it appears and disappears without warning, the brain starts to pay closer attention. It becomes more engaged, more alert, and more focused on trying to regain that connection. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling so compelling, and also explains why some people remain emotionally attached in unhealthy relationship patterns longer than they should. The unpredictability creates a stronger emotional pull than consistency ever could. When you stop contacting a man after previously being present, you introduce that unpredictability into the dynamic. He has already experienced your attention, your presence, and the emotional comfort that came with it. Now, with that suddenly gone, his mind reacts to the absence. It doesn't interpret it as nothing, it interprets it as change, and the brain is wired to respond to change by trying to understand it and restore what was there before. This is where the craving begins, not because you are actively doing anything, but because something familiar has been removed. Over time, that absence can create a stronger mental focus on you than constant interaction ever did. Another layer to this is ego. A person's ego is often tied to how desired and valued they feel in a romantic dynamic. When communication suddenly stops, it can create internal questions. He may start wondering whether something went wrong, whether he lost your interest, or whether someone else has replaced him. These thoughts are uncomfortable because they challenge his sense of certainty. And when people experience uncertainty, they tend to take action to resolve it. In this case, that action is often reaching out, checking in, or re-establishing contact, just to restore clarity. In doing so, the dynamic quietly shifts. He moves from passive certainty into active pursuit without any confrontation or explanation. Women who understand this dynamic stop trying to secure attention through constant effort. They no longer overextend, overtext, or overinvest emotionally in the early stages of connection. Instead, they redirect their focus toward their own lives' goals and emotional well-being. This shift naturally changes how they are perceived. A woman who is engaged in her own world, who is not constantly available, and who does not revolve around a man's attention becomes noticeably different in a sea of over-availability. That difference is what creates intrigue, not effort for its own sake. At its core, this is not about games or calculated behavior. It is about emotional balance. When someone is always available, the relationship loses tension, and without tension, attraction often weakens. But when availability becomes less predictable, a natural sense of curiosity returns. The other person starts to pay more attention, not because they are being forced, but because something in the dynamic has shifted and now requires interpretation. That mental engagement is what brings focus back. It also becomes a test of value perception. If a man was taking your presence for granted, silence disrupts that assumption. What once felt guaranteed now feels uncertain. And in that moment, appreciation often increases because absence highlights value more clearly than presence ever could. Whether he chooses to act on it or not, ultimately reveals how invested he truly was. What remains most important in all of this is not strategy, but self-positioning. When you stop centering your life around someone who has not matched your energy, you naturally step into a more grounded and self-respecting space. From that place, your attention is no longer something given automatically. It is something that carries weight. And people tend to respond very differently when they realize access to you is not guaranteed but earned. He will often wonder what changed. He may try to reconnect, to re-establish the flow that once existed. But if his interest was never truly deep, if he was mainly enjoying your attention without real emotional investment, your silence won't trigger pursuit. It will be met with more silence. and that response, or lack of it, removes all confusion. You are no longer left guessing what he meant or how he feels. His behavior becomes the answer itself. That kind of clarity is powerful because it stops you from overthinking and brings you back to reality. This is why women who naturally step back and stop overinvesting rarely find themselves in desperate emotional cycles. They don't chase inconsistency. They don't fight for attention that isn't being freely given. Instead, they operate from a simple understanding. Genuine interest is shown through action, not ambiguity. If a man wants to stay connected, he will make that effort clear. If he doesn't, the distance speaks for itself. That mindset removes the emotional chaos of waiting, interpreting, and hoping. Life continues forward, and the right connection meets them in motion, not in stillness. From another angle, silence also disrupts a man's sense of control in the early stages of attraction. Often he feels he is steering the interaction, deciding when to text, how often to engage, and how far things progress. When that rhythm suddenly stops, that sense of control is interrupted. He is no longer managing the pace, he is reacting to a shift he did not initiate. That discomfort pushes him to reassess the situation. He may reach out not only out of curiosity, but also to regain a sense of clarity over what changed and where he stands. In doing so, the dynamic subtly shifts. He moves from directing the interaction to trying to recover it. This is not about performing disinterest or acting distant for effect. There is a clear difference between pretending and genuinely living a life that does not revolve around constant communication. One is a strategy, the other is a reflection of priorities. When a woman is truly focused on her own growth, routines, and purpose, her availability naturally becomes limited. She is not waiting for interaction because her time is already occupied with meaningful things. That authenticity is difficult to ignore because it is not manufactured behavior, it is simply how she lives. In that space, absence creates mental space for reflection on his side. Without regular contact, he starts forming his own interpretations. He begins to think about past interactions, replay conversations, and question the shift in energy. With no immediate answers available, his mind fills the gap with curiosity and uncertainty. That unresolved loop keeps attention anchored longer than consistent reassurance ever could because the brain continues searching for resolution. It also introduces the possibility of loss, which is one of the strongest emotional triggers in human behavior. When something feels accessible, it is often overlooked, but when access is no longer guaranteed, its perceived value increases. The idea that you might be moving forward, meeting new people, or simply no longer prioritizing him adds urgency to his response. Not because of manipulation, but because absence naturally forces comparison between what was comfortable and what might now be gone. He doesn't want the idea of losing you to someone else. He doesn't want to look back later and feel like he didn't put in enough effort, and that fear alone can push him to re-engage with more intensity than he showed before. At that point, many women who understand this pattern stop pouring energy into men who are inconsistent. They don't try to explain their value. They don't chase clarity through over-communication. They simply step back and pay attention to what actually happens next. If a man is genuinely interested, he notices the shift and responds to it. If he isn't, his silence gives the answer without any emotional struggle or confusion. Either way, the outcome removes you from uncertainty. You either see effort return or you see the truth immediately. That is why this approach often feels freeing. It takes you out of the cycle of guessing, waiting, and over-investing in someone who may not be meeting you halfway. Instead of staying stuck analyzing every message or timing your actions, you return your focus to your own life, and in doing so, the emotional imbalance naturally corrects itself. There is no need to force an outcome or convince someone of your worth. The connection either grows through mutual effort or fades without resistance. Both outcomes protect your time and energy, which is often the part most people overlook. At the core of all of this is self-worth. The ability to stop reaching out without spiraling, without chasing reassurance, and without needing immediate validation reflects a deeper internal grounding. It comes from knowing that your presence has value and should not be freely given to someone who treats it casually. When that mindset is real, it changes the way you carry yourself in every interaction. You are no longer negotiating your worth through effort. You are simply expressing it through boundaries. It is important to understand that this only works when it is genuine. If someone tries to apply silence as a tactic while internally feeling anxious, attached, or desperate for a response, that contradiction shows. Energy like that is often felt on the other side, even without words. But when the decision to step back comes from a real place of self-respect and emotional independence, the entire dynamic shifts naturally. There is no performance involved, only alignment between how you feel and how you act. In that space, your absence takes on a different meaning. It is no longer just silence, it becomes a reflection of changed priorities. The other person is left to interpret that shift on their own. And in many cases, that uncertainty leads to reflection, curiosity, and renewed effort. Not because you forced it, but because your absence disrupted what was previously taken for granted. Ultimately, what draws people back is not chasing, pleading, or over-explaining. It is contrast, the contrast between constant availability and sudden distance, between emotional access and emotional withdrawal. That contrast creates awareness, and awareness often leads to action. So the real takeaway is not about controlling someone else's behavior, but about controlling your own level of investment. When your energy is no longer automatic and instead becomes something that is matched, respected, and valued, the entire dynamic changes. And whether someone steps up or steps away, you are no longer losing anything. You are simply seeing things clearly for what they are.